like say a person down on his luck, he goes to welfare and stuff like that. Um, it's a Republican standpoint that people should be autonomous. The government doesn't have the responsibility to take care of people, feed them, clothe them, medical, this, that, whatever. Do you agree with that Republican standpoint?
I agree with the standpoint that people are always going to run into roadblocks or bumps in the road. I believe the government should be there to give them a hand up to help them out of that. Perfect scenario. If you look at Norway. Norway sets aside, I think it's something like 32 months of welfare. So if you lose your job or you need help, healthcare wise, there's 32 months or something out there that they give to you. Once you burn up that 32 months, you're on your own. That's why in Norway, when people lose their jobs, they make a mad dash because they know that clock is ticking against them. Unlike here in the United States, somebody loses their job, they get on unemployment. They don't even start looking for a job until their unemployment benefits start to run out. And then some politician says, oh, they're down on their luck. The economy's not doing it. Let's extend the unemployment benefits for another 6 months. I mean,
well, you kind of have similar views to me that like there is some responsibility of the government to take care of those down on their luck.
But not to be continuous. The problem we have with the U.S. government now is once they start giving the handouts are unlimited. They never have a cutoff point.
Here's my beef with the whole system like that is that go back many years where there was less regulation. If a man, whatever reason, didn't have an gainful employment at some factory or something else, and he couldn't find anything, well, that's no big deal to the man. He would just take his rifle, which undoubtedly he had, go out to the woods, shoot a deer. That would be his food for the next few months. Or he would go fishing, take as many fish as he can catch, and that would be his food. Or he'd chop down a tree and he would get some firewood that way to supply his home. Or he would just simply chop down a tree, the nearest one, whatever, make a table out of it and sell the table. There's various things that individual, somewhat healthy individual could do if they were down on their luck as far as not being able to find gainful employment goes. However, since that time, long time ago, it's been regulated out of existence. That type of lifestyle has been regulated out of existence. You have fishing licenses. So in other words, you're paying the government to even fish. So you're already down on the money of it. Then you have creel limits. You can only take so many and only a certain kind and only a certain type of year. You can't go hunting for deer any old time you feel hungry. You can't chop down trees in a forest without having to pay somebody something. You can't build a cabin in the woods if you wanted to without having to pay some licensing fees. So they have regulated away from self-sustaining activities. If they're going to do the regulation and take away the self-sustaining activities that a person could have done, then they are responsible for when that person can't provide.
I don't see it so much as regulating self-sustaining activities away. It's the nature of how people live today. We're not all living on farms anymore. Not everybody can go out and hunt deer or chop down trees, even if they have the skills. I mean, it's just not doable today because of the rise of cities and the suburbs.
So when you tell a man, you cannot feed yourself with fish, you cannot feed yourself with game, you cannot build your house, you cannot this, cannot that, cannot that. When you regulate all that stuff away from him, then you are the one that becomes responsible for that stuff if he can't do it himself.
Right. I mean, that's not practical in today's day.
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't matter if it's practical or not. We've gotten ourselves in a bind. There are people that cannot seem to fit into society.
All right. What I'm saying is this. Let's say you remove all those regulations. What people hunt and fish and chop down trees without any restrictions. Is everybody going to do that? Is everybody capable of doing that? Does everybody live in an area where that could be done? I mean, you're going to have millions of people going out hunting and fishing every day and chopping down trees.
You're the quintessential all or nothing person. You're the quintessential.
Well, I mean, it's not a valid analogy today.
Well, do you think people are just going to quit their jobs because they want to go hunting or build cabins in the woods? No one's going to stop. No big banker or Wall Street financier is going to say, you know what, I'm going to build a cabin in the woods and go fishing. People are going to keep what they're doing. I'm talking about the down on their luck groups.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, you're blaming it all on these regulations. I mean, if you eliminate the regulations, you're still going to have massive amounts of people who are living in cities or suburbs going out hunting, fishing, and chopping down trees. I mean, it just can't happen anymore.
But has to happen. Somebody has to feed them. It's either they themselves feed themselves,
All right.
or the government feeds them.
The population of New York City, you're going to have 9 million people going out into the woods hunting, fishing.
Again, Larry, you're the quintessential all or nothing.
Well, tell me
maybe like 10,000 or something.
Tell me what the middle ground is there for people living in New York City.
There ain't no middle ground. I've already given you the other side of the coin. If you don't want them feeding themselves, hunting, fur-bearing animals, and all this other stuff, then if they can't do it for whatever reason, you have to provide it to them.
All right. So how are you going to provide it? If you deregulate all this, you're going to have 9 million people in New York City and the suburbs of New York City going out fending them for themselves. Where are they going to go?
Why do you keep saying 9 million people? I'm talking about 10,000.
What are you going to do with the people in New York City? Or even
work like they always done.
What's that?
They're going to continue to do what they've always been doing. I'm not saying everybody has to quit their job.
Oh, I'm saying it's not regulations that are preventing that sort of thing. It's the nature of society, the structure of society today.
No, here, I'll tell you where this started from. There's a video on YouTube of an older mountain man looking guy. He was fishing and he was just trying to feed himself. And he seems to have washed his hands of any rules and regulations and doesn't care about nothing with the government at all. And he was just living on his own. Well, they sent in, I don't know who they sent, cops or forest rangers or somebody to nail his butt. They brought him to trial. They kicked his butt, and I don't know whatever happened to the guy, but he was there saying all I was trying to do was feed myself. That's all I was trying to do. And you're telling me I can't even do that. I'm a man, for crying out loud. I was trying to feed myself.
How does that relate to the urban population that we have in the United States today?
It doesn't. I'm talking about the ones that fall through the cracks.
I think what Rack's trying to say here, if you take people that are on like welfare systems and you say, hey, we're going to allow you to go fishing and hunting with no license, you can unlimited hunting, unlimited fishing. Those people will try their best to get. They don't want to go hunting and fishing. They don't want to lose their welfare checks. It will give them motivation to actually go out and do it. Just like 200 years ago when people came to the United States, they had no option but to go out and hunt and fish and farm to sustain themselves. Well, that's the problem we're into right now. Is the government is basically creating a welfare state to where nobody wants to do anything for themselves.
And they're kneecapping people to boot. They're saying, boom, here, I kneecapped you now, but now you still have to go on your own.
I understand that was doable in terms of people going out and finding jobs when the economy was better. Today, it's harder to find jobs generally, even if you kick them out of welfare to go find a job. I mean, the types of jobs that are begging for workers now are the ones that were in place before the pandemic. So you still wouldn't have enough jobs in this economy for all the people on welfare if they were willing to go out and find those jobs.
Well, I gotta say that there's this idea that welfare is a handout, and I disagree with that, because once you get off welfare, if you ever get off of it, you have to pay it back.
Well, I think this is one of the problems that has led up to all these low-paying jobs and stuff. So many jobs have been sent overseas to China and Asia. Why couldn't we become like a China? What stopped us in the 1950s from making all the semiconductors, making all the cars, making all the little toys and stuff, say made in the USA? What stopped us from becoming a China?
Well, what happened was, clearly the politicians allowed this kind of outsourcing to China because the corporations donate to the politicians their campaigns. So that's when all this started, where there's no incentive for these corporations to remain here if they're allowed to go overseas with China, which clearly the political system is allowed.
But part of that also comes back to the politicians also to another degree created. You put regulations on companies. You have a minimum wage. And somebody basically said, hey, I can't pay this minimum wage. I can't pay this health insurance. I can't deal with all these regulations you guys have put on me. Can you open up the door for me to go overseas and produce over there where I don't have to pay a minimum wage? I don't have to pay benefits. And that's how all this came about. And it's just a big circle.
Yeah, the world became corrupt as a result of every single person becoming corrupt in themselves. Not everybody, but a lot.
Yeah, Mark, but what you're saying about how if you didn't have all these minimum wage and all that, that might have retained some of the jobs. But once all that ultra low cost labor was available overseas, especially in China, even if you knocked out the mandatory minimum wage and all that, it still wouldn't have stopped the exodus of these companies because, you know, it's simple math. You know, if you could get something manufactured in China for $1, and it would cost you even $5 here or even $2 here, without minimum wage and all that, it still costs more here because of our living standards. Then there's no way you're going to keep companies here once they're allowed to outsource.
There you go. There's the thing. Allowed to outsource. Maybe we should have been a closed system.
Yeah, that could have worked too.
And then you get into the debate over, you know, free enterprise and all that. How much government regulation do we want to close the system?
Well, what should have happened is if the corporations are going to exist, they should have been a closed system, United States corporations. They can sell their products, but they can't outsource jobs. They can't outsource manufacturing. They have to manufacture, build their products here. They can sell them elsewhere. That's fine, but they can't outsource jobs and everything else like that.
But here's a perfect example. So like for gasoline, right now, it only costs for the refineries to turn oil into gasoline, only costs them roughly about 50 cents. But gasoline, as we know it, doesn't cost 50 cents. Why? Because on that 50 cents to refine it, you have all these government regulations on it. You have the EPA regulations. You got Department of Labor on it. You got sales tax on top of it. So by the time everything's said and done, your 50 cents per gallon turns into $4 because of a lot of just being state taxes, government taxes, and regulations.
Well, you know, another thing is oil, like many other commodities and products, is a global market, which is allowed. And, you know, what we were producing under Trump, where we became self-sufficient in oil, all that oil wasn't staying here. It was a global market. So it's being sold abroad. But we were in better shape. But what I'm saying is now, you know, should there be regulations where oil produced in the U.S., extracted in the U.S., should remain in the U.S.? Or will that interfere in the big picture with trade, which, you know, free trade supposedly benefits?
Biden shouldn't be sending our reserves to China or anywhere else for that matter.
I agree. But here's the thing.
That's another issue.
But here's the thing. If you drill the oil here and you sell it to China, great. Exxon just made an extra $1 billion from selling it. Guess what? The United States gets 20% of that in corporate taxes of that $1 billion. It's a win-win.
So what you're saying is selling oil on the global market rather than restricting it to the U.S. is a good thing.
Yeah, but here's the problem. We're not pumping it here. Biden's having to go to Saudi Arabia and begging people in Venezuela and Saudi Arabia to pump more. We have more oil here in the United States than Saudi Arabia. Pump it here, create some great jobs, and the government gets a tax windfall from it being produced here as well.
But the question is, what's produced here, should it stay here domestically or should it be allowed on the global market?
No, put it on the global market. That's more money for the U.S. government. If you sell $1 billion here, well, you make $200 million in profit on it. Sell $1 billion here and $1 billion overseas, you just now made $400 million in tax revenue for the government.
Well,
but you have to produce more here to sell more.
Are the corporations obliged to pay the same amount of taxes when they sell abroad as they would here?
Well, yeah. If you're producing it, if you're pumping it here and then selling it overseas, yeah, that's a profit that's going to come back into the United States. It's going to be taxed.
So you're all for globalization then?
I'm saying if we have a product that's in demand around the world, why don't we produce more of it? It would lower the cost here at home. It would create more jobs and bring in more tax revenue. I can't see how the government doesn't want that.
But would it lower the cost of gasoline at the pump for Americans if it's being sold abroad as well? If it was kept here, wouldn't it be a lower cost to Americans?
Well, that's what I'm saying. You pump enough oil here to get the prices down for the American citizens, and then the extra oil you pump, you sell it overseas and make a windfall.
Well, wouldn't prices come down even more if you kept the consumption domestic, not globally?
Well, at some point it would come down to an equilibrium point. But what I'm trying to say here for the government is once you get that, let's say you get gasoline down to, let's say, a dollar a gallon. That's great. Unless you start cutting into regulations and stuff like that, you're not going to, because it costs 50 cents to produce it, right? To convert it. Unless you go in and start cutting the regulations and the taxes and the sales tax and all those regulations on it, that's the only way you're going to get it lower. There's going to be a point to where it gets only so low due to regulations. That's why you pump more of it, send it overseas, and the government gets a windfall tax on all that additional oil.
Larry, think of a theoretical concept. Like if there were no corporations in the world and if there was no insurance, these two things, because this is a pooling of stuff into another entity, basically. Doctors would not be able to charge you tens of thousands of dollars for a procedure. The only reason they can charge you that is because there's deep pockets in insurance companies. So if insurance companies were wiped out, people would have to pay the doctors out of their own pockets. The doctors would not be able to charge extraordinary amount of prices. They would have to come down in price and be reasonable priced people. So that would take care of the medical industry. The medical industry is out of hand because of insurance companies, in my opinion. So also the same thing goes for corporations. Mom and pops cannot compete with these 10,000, 15, 50,000 employee corporations. So there's no more competition, especially now with the super corporations that seem to own everything. Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street.
All right. I agree that that's part of the problem. Let's say medical costs. Now, part of the problem is the insurance, is driving up the cost because, they can get it. However, you go to a doctor, let's say a general practitioner, and the visit may cost you $50. He orders tests for you, which involves scans and all kinds of fancy medical equipment. There's a cost there. Now, you're not going to be able to afford to, even if that wasn't inflated, there's going to be significant costs for a lot of these tests with the electronic equipment, the scanners, the MRIs, and all that. So how do you get around that?
You don't. First of all, I don't know how much of that equipment would even exist under what I was talking about, because the money wouldn't be there for that type of equipment, I don't think.
Are we better off with that kind of equipment or not?
Yeah, but are we better off with socialism? Because what you're talking about is little pockets of socialism.
Well, would you forego having an MRI or a scan if you have a serious condition? Because
so you're not doing a deep thinking, pull yourself back type thinking. I'm talking about just very lofty concepts and stuff like that. Look, if you go to Black's Law Dictionary and you look up corporation, what do you think the definition is?
I don't know. What is it?
A person. If you go to Black's Law Dictionary and look up a human being, what do you think the definition is?
You're going off on a tangent here.
Answer the question.
I'm asking you a specific question. If you go to a doctor, general practitioner, he charges you $50 for an office visit, but then says tests are necessary, and that involves these huge MRI machines, electronic scans, and all that. Even if the cost of that equipment wasn't inflated, it would still be a significant cost. So how do you pay for that without insurance?
Here's the thing, go to Mexico. Look at how many people live on the Texas and Arizona border that go to Mexico to get their medicines and to get their medical procedures. The reason why is because Mexico doesn't have as much regulations. When here in the United States, a lot of the prices for the MRI, the drugs, regulation costs are all built into that.
So there's some sort of a drug in America that costs like $5,000 for a little bottle. You go to Mexico and it's like 50 cents.
Yeah.
Same thing with,
Anyway, the answer to the Black's Law Dictionary for a human being definition is monster.
So
we've created monsters. Corporations shouldn't exist. Should be only partnerships or sole proprietorships, and partnerships up to a limit, not 10,000 employee or 10,000 owners or whatever.
but isn't there some benefit to scale? You know, having mass production.
Yes, yeah, but see, it's also going to kick us in the ass in the end, which it's kind of doing now. All of our manufacturing is over in China. Why? Because they're a dictatorship. They have people working 12 hours a day in sweatshops. They don't have a say. If they try to raise a question about it, you shoot them in the head, you charge the family for the bullet, and then you get somebody else in to take their job.
When were corporations first created, Mark?
In the United States, the Hoover Dam was the first one, and it had a limited time because they knew the dangers of corporations, and it had to be stated what it's being used for, when it will be dissolved, and it had to dissolve once it was done. Now, prior to that, we're talking about the T Corporation or whatever.
All right, so the Hoover Dam, that was in the 30s.
But it goes back before that.
The actual corporations go all the way back to the Revolutionary War. They were basically just private companies that people basically trade. When you hear people call curb trading, back in the pre-Revolutionary War, you basically would walk up, a guy would be standing on the street corner, Wall Street in this situation. You walk up to him and be like, kind of a drug dealer, and say, "Hey man, you got some of that General Electric for me?" "Yeah, man. How about $1 a share?" "Yeah, I'll take it." It was literally like that. It was done on a curb there on Wall Street.
All right. Well, now the Rockefellers and all the robber barons, were those corporations?
Banks are corporations.
Which companies?
Standard Oil.
All those were corporations, and they actually started trading on the stock exchange. The first official stock exchange was created in 1896. So in 1896, there was actually an exchange where you go where there's a group of people trading the stocks back and forth. Prior to 1896, it was more of a private transaction.
So even without corporations, you'd still have wealth and production controlled by a lot of rich individuals that have a corner on the market. So how much worse is a corporation to a robber baron that's operating freely as a person?
I'm not for socialism, except for maybe one thing: natural resources. In Alaska, they get a dividend paid to them every year or twice a year or something like that for all the oil and stuff going out of Alaska. Why can't why did what's his face, the big oil barons, or the railroad, that's a different story, but the big oil barons and stuff like that, you can't have one person dominating a whole natural resource. That should be a shared thing amongst people, I think.
So government control of natural resources. Yeah.
And something else, we always talk about how we, taxes. I think we're beyond the point of taxes nowadays. In this technological world, I think the government could set up a website for donations and let people donate. So if you're driving on the road and you hit too many potholes, there you go, you do your donation thing and donate for potholes. If you, I think we're almost to that point where we could do that.
Well, the argument I would make is I don't think the government should regulate anything really, especially natural resources, because they have such a long history of mismanaging stuff. I'm sure you've heard the old joke: if you put the U.S. government in charge of the Saudi Arabian desert, they would start importing sand next week because it's just that poorly mismanaged. It would just be a disaster.
Another extremely bad thing is property taxes, as far as I'm concerned. If you buy a house, it should be your house, your property.
I agree. There's no reason. No one, when people were settling land 200 years ago, nobody taxed them. They settled it. They made it into a cash producing farm or whatever. Now the government just wants to take their fingers and put their fingers into other people's business. There's no reason the government should basically have a say-so on my property. And then if you can't pay the property taxes, the government comes in and seizes it from you.
Yeah, alloidial title is what needs to be everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, George Washington and those people, they would be up in arms right now if you told them the government is going to tax your property. Remember the Boston Tea Party about taxes, that the government's going to tax your personal property and then take it away from you if you can't pay it.
There was
when did property taxes come in, Mark?
Ooh, property taxes came in, I think, right after the revolution, not the revolution, after the Civil War, because the government needed tax revenue to because the government was basically rebuilding everything from the Civil War. They started putting taxes on stuff to try to recoup or use that money to rebuild the South.
And supposedly those taxes were supposed to be temporary. They never stopped.
What would you replace the property tax with that would enable enough revenue for the government?
I think a flat national sales tax is what should be put in place, because that way you couldn't, there's people right now that try to use all these tax loopholes and stuff like that. If you put a flat tax out there, you go to McDonald's, you buy a hamburger, hey, you're spending that money. Well, the government gets X percentage of that money that you pay for that hamburger. Yeah, the cost of it will go up, but the amount of money that you're going to save on paying in taxes will be substantial.
Just today in the news, there was some chick that got in trouble for pulling a scam for one of these crowdfunding things, GoFundMe or whatever. What she did was she got some bum or something like that off the street, filmed them and took pictures with them, and then told the people a story saying, I ran out of gas and I had no money. And this guy who's homeless, he had his last $20 and he gave them to me. And I want to do something for him. Let's get him some money so we can make his life better. And 14,000 people, I don't know what the total number donated was $400,000. And she got in trouble because she was pocketing that stuff some way. But if all we're doing is we're talking about the internet, we're saying, hey, this homeless guy needs some money, and $400,000 come in, that's not a bad deal. Why can't the government do stuff like that for whatever it needs?
Well, and not to mention the income tax that we have now. When it was originally put in place in, I think, 1914, it was only supposed to be on people that made over like $1 million a year, and it was like just 10% of that. But then once the government got that sugar rush off us, like, hey, this is good enough, we should tax everybody.
And that's why the government is almost like a corporation, which is, in my opinion, the monsters. We created those monsters. They needed to be controlled and contained. They've gotten loose, and now they're ripping people to shreds. If a person spends their whole life working and whatever, they buy a home, now they're old and they're living off whatever they can, their pension or whatever they're living off of. But it's pittance compared to what they used to get. The property taxes, they still have to pay that. If they don't pay it, what? Are you telling me they're going to lose their home? They're going to be thrown out? And this happens all the time. This is ridiculous. We can't live like this as a society.
Yeah, Mark, I don't know how it works in Tennessee where you live, but in Pennsylvania, where I live, school district taxes are really high, especially, for senior citizens on fixed incomes living on Social Security, whose kids are long gone. I understand the benefits to society of universal education, but the school district taxes are really high, and if you don't pay them, you lose your house. So
you're right, Larry. And it starts with like income tax or workers tax or whatever. Then it goes to property tax, and then after that, garbage tax. I mean, the property tax is supposed to take care of the garbage. But they figure, we have to pay this dumping place so much. Why don't we add on a garbage tax? And it's a never-ending story. Why do you think all the streets in almost every town, I would guarantee every town, I only know Pennsylvania, but I guarantee it's everywhere, 50 states, where all these little main streets and stuff like that are 25 miles an hour. That's a revenue generation for the city. Set up a little speed trap and you got your money. Nobody drives 25 miles an hour anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the taxes are
all about revenue generation. We created a monster, and they're looking for every other way they can get more. And are you kidding me? This is all going to legitimate stuff. People are pocketing this stuff. I worked for a CETA program, a city program. Oh, you should hear this one, Larry. So I worked at some trolley company. The city of Scranton was paying me half, I guess, and the owner of the trolley company was paying me the other half, I guess, or whatever, how it works. I don't know how it works. But he has me going to another building that was being torn down by the city and everybody else. There was like 10 of us, and we had to tear off all the nifty, they had wonderful woodwork and all this stuff, and we had to take it all down on city money. We're taking this stuff down, putting it in a truck, and where are we bringing it? To his house to put it back up on his archways and stuff like that. And the city was paying for this. This happens all the time, and this is taxpayer money. Right. I was a kid. I was like 18, 17, 18 at the time. I didn't think about this stuff, but now I'm thinking about it.
Yeah. There's analogies to Rome, the Roman Empire, and how it fell. More and more people were on the equivalent of welfare after a lot of them were dispossessed from their farms because the wealthy aristocrats took over the farmland, and then we're using immigrant labor to farm it, cheaper labor. So the farmers and other country people flocked to Rome, where they were given more and more handouts, and where you had a division of wealth more and more like we have today, and more the equivalent of immigrants coming in being used by Rome, and even as mercenary fighters. So the so-called barbarians learned Roman techniques and technology, which they use against them eventually to sack Rome. So,
we're familiar with Hitler. Okay, right now in this world, the new Hitler is called Klaus Schwab, and he's got a secondary man or whatever. I forget the other, that his name is weird, and I forget his weird name, but the Davos Group or World Economic Forum or something like that. Well, this guy, who's very powerful in either Davos or World Economic Forum, was asked, like, well, what's going to happen in the future? And he gives his future vision. Well, nobody's going to work no more. They're going to get handouts from the government, and what they will do all day is play video games because it gives them more fulfillment than actual living in the real world. This is what he stated to whoever was interviewing him. So they have that as a vision. No more working for anybody. Just play video games all day long.
Yeah, Mark, universal basic income, and you will own nothing but be happy. How would that work economically? Where would the money come from?
Wouldn't. You'd have to tax the super rich, and that just won't work.
Yeah, so I mean, all this talk about universal basic income and owning nothing but enjoying it. I mean, where would the government get any kind of money to sustain any of this?
Oh, the government doesn't care. The government these days is the politicians are just concerned about being in power. Just like, if you look at people like, Saddam Hussein, who lived in billion-dollar palaces, Chavez, who lived in these extreme palaces and stuff while everybody else was poor. They just want to do this universal income so they get elected, because once you elect these officials, they live much, much wealthier than billionaires live. I mean, it's a glorious position to be in.
Larry, if you were the regulator of money and you controlled the entire world and you said this, and you wrote on a piece of paper, this is a dollar bill, this is a $5 bill, this is a $10 bill, go use it amongst yourselves to buy, sell, whatever, right? How would that system collapse? The reason our fiat currency is collapsing now is because we owe somebody something, and we can't keep up with it. It's this compounded interest. It's interest and compounded interest. But if it was done by a closed entity that didn't have to worry about nothing, all he's doing is saying, this is what it costs. This is what this is worth. Go use it. This is what this is worth. It's never going to collapse. People will use that all over the place. It never collapse.
But another thing I also want to throw, going back to the Roman Empire, another thing that, caused the downfall of the Roman Empire was Roman citizens didn't want to raise their kids. They used immigrants and slaves from wars they won to come in and babysit and nanny their children. And what did those slaves and immigrants do? They installed their cultures and their wokeness into them. essentially over centuries of that happening, the Roman children, the actual Roman citizens' children, they got to the point to where they hated the Roman Empire. And when the barbarians started coming in, they're like, hey, that's a great thing. The Rome has trampled on people for thousands of years. It's about time they're getting the medicine served to them. And that's one of the reasons why the Roman Empire fell, was exactly what's happening here in the United States. There's no patriotism left.
Yeah, like the kids being brainwashed hating America, and yeah.
But see, that's orchestrated. You're right, Larry, but it's orchestrated. It's not just done, organically. Someone is pulling those strings. They want to collapse.
Yeah, I mean, so much is being thrown at us that's destructive to the U.S. You begin to wonder, is this all through incompetence or accidental, or is there a larger plan afoot?
I'm telling you, there's these dudes with social engineers sitting in a room trying to figure out how to mess with people's heads.
I think a lot, it's just that the politicians already are so disconnected from what people actually need and want that they sit here and go, oh, this is a great idea. That's a great idea. They have no idea of what the consequences of it are or how it operates. You have people writing regulations on stuff that they've never worked in that industry. You got some politicians that have never worked, period. They've been politicians for all of their lives. All they know is how to get reelected. It's the only thing they're good at. And it's never ending.
Yeah, Mark, why is Elon Musk backing out of the Twitter deal?
Why? I think he has buyer's remorse. He doesn't want to pay $40 billion for a company that shouldn't be in existence to begin with.
Wait a minute. It's because they basically lied to him. They said we have 10 million users, but then it turned out that like 2 billion of those users were not real people. They're bots.
Oh, I don't think he had any intention of ever buying Twitter to begin with, to be honest.
Maybe not, but besides the point, his contention is that most of that company is they didn't tell him they lied to him. Most of that company's bots. These Twitter accounts you see all over the place aren't real people. Now, why would that Twitter have that many bots? Because they're trying to social engineer. I go to a news. I have a news thing on my phone. I read it every day. There's a comment section, thankfully, so far. And if it's something about Trump, the first 3 or 4, invariably, the first 3 or 4 comments are always anti-Trump. And they're from weird named people. I guarantee they're bots. I guarantee that they have it set up a system. If they write a story about Trump, that the instant that story is posted, boom, you got 4 comments, all anti-Trump. And what this is complete and total social engineering. It's basically complete and total mind control. Now, a younger liberal person who wants the world to be kumbaya and utopia, they're going to look at this story and say, oh, Trump bad, Trump bad, Trump bad. Then they're going to go to the comment section and say, oh, Trump bad, Trump. Okay, I'm going to get on board with that. Trump bad. That's what's happening in this world. Same thing is happening with guns. Take a look what's happening with guns in the news anymore. Oh, guns kill this and gun crimes and gun this and gun. It's social engineering. They want to get rid of the guns from people so they can do this collapse without having their houses shot up.
Mark, why do you say that Musk never intended to buy Twitter to begin with? Why do you make a big show of this?
I think his primary goal here was he wanted to expose Twitter for basically all this, that a bunch of the accounts aren't real. They're using the bots, the fake accounts. They're trying to suppress free speech. Now that he's backed out of the deal, he's going to get to go into a courtroom, and all this stuff that Twitter has never wanted to be made public on stuff that they've kept in-house on their formulas on how they calculate for bots, fake accounts. In the court of law, they're going to have to basically prove all this stuff that Elon Musk has said they're actually doing.
Yeah, but you know what's going to happen? It's going to be like when a country gets invaded, what do they do with the embassy stuff? They just burn it and shred it and everything else. That's probably what's going on Twitter.
Yeah, but then that works in his favor, because if you can't produce it, then you come up with the things that, well, you've been telling the SEC for all these years with all your documents you've submitted to the SEC and your 10Qs and 10Ks. You've said that's the truth, but you don't have anything to back it up. Did you submit fraudulent reports to the SEC?
So, but again, why should he care? Well, why should he get involved in this? Just to do a public service?
Well, I think he's got kind of irritated at how Twitter kind of suppresses stuff, and I think he just wants to put them in their place.
Yeah, so Twitter bans conservatives left and right. I mean, it's the only group that gets banned. You could be a mass murderer, Democrat, a liberal, and you're on there all the time. You're a conservative with conservative values, they kick you off. Yeah. What's the country now that's going ape because they have no food? Norway, is it?
Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka also, but I think it's also Norway, isn't it?
Yeah, Norway.
Norway's in good shape.
Well, I know Norway's like one of the most richest countries, but I think the food thing is going on. And what's happening? They're paying the farmers not to farm.
No, what happened was that they banned fertilizers that were artificial, and that really put a crimp in the farmers' operation.
You got China buying up farmland in the United States. You got Bill Gates buying up farmland in the United States. You got something happening in Sri Lanka, the same type of thing. You got something happening in Norway, the same type of thing. A food crisis is being orchestrated. No better way to control people, except for maybe making them starve. Once they're starving, they're going to be easily controlled.
All right. Well, to be continued. So thanks, everybody. And anybody out there who's following us, we'll be back soon. Thanks a lot.
All right. Good one. All right. Have a good one.
Good, Mark.